In a new age of Watchmen, a team of individuals, pooling their talents and abilities, come together to bring analysis, reaction, and comedy to the fold. This is their chronicle. This is Accounting Arc.
All right, welcome everyone. Today we wanted to tackle, well, what I thought was going to be a little more of a controversial issue, because I thought Liz was going to actually oppose me based on what she said earlier. But so it turns out maybe we're all a little closer in what we're looking at. So today we wanted to ask the question: is accounting really STEM? And Liz, since you said you kind of looked at the background of STEM, do you want to kick us off and let's get on the same page on what is STEM?
Yeah, absolutely. So STEM has been categorized by, science and engineering and mathematics, right? And of course, technology. But when you look at it and you look at the underlying proponents of STEM and how it's implemented, it is hands-on learning. It is giving people practical real world applications for concepts that they're learning. And I believe underlying all of it, which brings it together, is a rules based application of theory in the real world. So that's how I would define STEM. Now, I know that there are various definitions and underlying reasons why people want it to be STEM or not. So that we can get into the details. But if we all agree on like the primary underlying definition, I think it becomes a more simple conversation.
So the key thing you said there, which I'm a little iffy on the underlying, which actually will support accounting not being STEM, is the rules based. So yes, we have rules in accounting, but when we really look at it, we're principles based, right? So it's not strictly rules. I mean, in the US, GAAP does tend to be more rules based, but when we look internationally, it's technically principles based. So there's a much deeper level of interpretation that's involved rather than the per se hard science that you would see in your typical math, engineering.
Okay. So let's look at the medical profession then, right? The medical profession has a series of rules, but it is also principles and underlying knowledge of those principles to make decisions. Yet that is never contested as something that should fall in STEM.
Never contested as something that does medicine, to me, medicine is science and it falls under STEM. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So,
Okay.
The practice of medicine, nursing, like that is STEM education fundamentally, right? And foundationally, because it's science, right? Medicine science, right? Medical science, right? But then if you look at it, it is truly taking knowledge, it's taking some rules based, but it's mostly principle based and interpretation and application of knowledge of, theory, which is what I would argue we do as accountants. We take accounting theory, the principles behind it, and we make ethical decisions based on what we know to work in the business world.
The difference that I see in the medical application of that is the underlying science doesn't change, right? The part where the principles comes into play with them is the like do no harm and the how they make a recommendation on what a client's going to do. The underlying stays the same. In our case, we could have exactly the same transaction, and then depending upon the context, we would make a different decision because based upon a principle, we would treat it one way or treat it another way.
See, I agree with that. And when you go back to the medical example, I don't think the science stays the same. Science is ever evolving. And people are constantly learning and testing new theories with studies, right? And so, like, I could go to the doctor last year and been given certain advice, and then a new study comes out, and I could go for the exact same issue this year and be given different advice.
But it's still based on the same underlying established science there versus ours. The principle is not changing. The rule is not. It's the principle that's causing the change. Because our standards evolve too, right?
Absolutely.
We see those.
So I think foundationally, I do think that accounting falls into STEM, and I think it falls into STEM because it is the application of an underlying foundation of knowledge. It requires thought. It requires, some calculations. It is more of a quantitative field overall. Granted, there's a lot that's qualitative in what we do. And also, I think that it's a gray area, right? Because STEM is very loosely defined and has been for how many years? Like since the 50s, right?
Yeah.
So
Although I think it used to be called SMET or something
Yeah, it
horrible.
was called SMET.
STEM is much nicer than SMET. That's for sure. But yeah, it's really interesting because I have found myself on both sides of the debate so many times because I can really easily be swayed. Like I can't necessarily say absolutely it should not be considered part of STEM. And then I can't say absolutely it should be. I can find arguments on both sides, which for me has been really kind of a roller coaster ride, especially even listening to the two of you on your exchange. I'm like, yeah, I agree with you both, and which means I don't agree with either of you, which is interesting. But when we talk about the historical aspects of STEM, the reason we're having this conversation today is because there's been a major push for a number of years now to get accounting included in STEM, or even at one point the push was to add an A, in fact, to make it STEAM. And the reason for that is the federal government has funding that they have been spending very generously to promote careers in STEM, which has led to a huge bubble of kids pursuing science, technology, engineering, and math. I mean, my oldest daughter's an engineer. My youngest daughter started as a science major in school because of STEM programs that were in her high school. So, the big push has been to get accounting added to that suite of careers and get federal funding to help us with these pipeline challenges that we've been having. After looking at the historical stuff, I began to dig into, where does that federal funding come from? What is the reason for that federal funding? And it really appears to go back to, I'm trying to find it. There's some historical stuff that even goes back to the 50s, like you mentioned, but really the most relevant is 2007 was the America Competes Act, which was created to make sure that the United States stayed competitive at a global scale against China and other countries with respect to science and technology. So, when I think about the reasoning for the federal funding, I don't necessarily see accounting as being that like needed skill for us to be able to compete with other countries. As it is with science and technology, which is where I then fall out of I don't think accounting really is STEM, even though I would love the federal funding to support careers in accounting.
Okay, I'm going to double down on my hypothesis that it is, in fact, STEM. Okay, so a little bit closer to home, right? So when you look at STEM, it includes technology, right? Now, information systems in recent history, the first major ones implemented in corporations were around accounting. If you don't understand the underlying technology, you cannot do our jobs at this point. And to that end, most programs in accounting have integrated knowledge of the systems and how they work in order to teach and train the next generation of accountants. Now, take that one step back. I have a degree in information technology, right? A technology degree. And I would argue that that degree gives me a competitive advantage understanding the underlying piece of the work that we do as accountants, because I get the design. I understand how the databases talk to each other, how we need to do our job on top of it and utilize that tech. Now, technology is not contested as part of STEM. It's literally in the acronym, right? Most colleges, if you go look at the programs that qualify as STEM programs on their websites, right? They have design, graphic design is on there in most colleges as a STEM program. So same argument, that's an art, right? They are doing art utilizing underlying technology. I am doing accounting utilizing underlying technology. Tell me how that's different.
That, I think, opens up the slippery slope, because the cashier working at the Kroger's down the street is utilizing technology to ring up your groceries. And so the use of technology, I don't think really is part of that. And then an earlier part of the earlier statement you made as well was we use it within the accounting function. We understand it. I would contend that probably 80%, maybe even 90% of the accountants using technology do not understand the underlying technology. There are the ones like us that are fairly dually trained, but the whole reason they need people like us still around is that most of them don't understand the technology.
So I would push back a little bit on that, in that I think the older accountants, so maybe our generation up, 80% don't understand the technology. I would argue that the younger generation does actually better understand, and there are more of them that are good at understanding the foundational systems that we utilize for our jobs. And I would secondly argue that that should be part of the educational program.
Oh yeah.
For success and for competitiveness against global forces.
Yeah, I agree that technology should absolutely be part of that core education for accountants. I would almost argue that if graphic design is included by certain schools, I think they're reaching. I don't think graphic design should be included. Like I think, I think there's a lot of people probably trying to force themselves into it like we are, to be able to receive the benefits of those programs. But I guess it's probably easier to say, maybe because they use a computer, but to your point, Liz, we use computers. Like I don't think you can do accounting without computers today. So yeah, it's see, I'm finding myself on both sides of the argument as usual.
Well, and I think maybe the argument is more complex than is it or is it not STEM, right? Maybe the like conversation or the debate is, should it be STEM in the way that we approach education and development for the future of our workforce? And is the existing profession, how it has existed for all of history, actually STEM? Right? Because I think that there is a delineation in this. But if we're directing the conversation around what funding is available and how we define the future of education for the profession changes that, I stand by my argument that we should be STEM in those instances. And we are basically business engineers. So I would argue we are business engineers utilizing technology and arithmetic, which is math. So we kind of hit it in a lot of different places.
Yeah, I mean it's a strong argument. I agree on many respects with that. I think I just go back to the one thing is a lot of that global competitiveness is with regards to the Department of Defense and those types of things. So I think that's where, and I probably need to understand better the details behind that, but based on my, kind of high level understanding, I don't know that accounting is kind of that critical of a skill to remain competitive at the global market, like technology and science.
Did you just say that? Really? Did I just hear
did.
you say that?
I did.
I heard that. I
It's
disagree. I think for
I
once, Donnie
completely
and I
disagree
agree
with
here.
that one. Yeah.
Donnie, get him.
So
Why do you disagree?
if we look at part of the global competitiveness, the one of the big points in that, and the Britannica definition of STEM that I was looking at, and their concluding statement was, despite all the differences, all reports agreed that workers in STEM occupations were critically important. They drive economic growth and competitiveness through innovations that address global challenges and create additional jobs. So when you really look at, and you're looking at it from a, do we drive economic growth? Like the finance function or the outsourced finance function, like a firm like Liz, is we're responsible for driving that economic growth. If you think about it from an investment standpoint, and the auditors and what they're doing, they're driving investment or reliability of investments, right, in the information provided to investors. So if you say we're not responsible for driving economic growth, I'd be like, then what do we do as a profession? Like, that's part of our whole thing.
Yeah, I mean
Also,
that. Go ahead.
zoology is STEM.
Zoology is STEM.
Please tell me how that's more important on the global.
Yeah, that's fair. That's definitely fair. I mean, and again, I think that goes back to my point. I think there's a lot of things that STEM is probably poorly defined, and there's a lot of things that are getting added to it that don't necessarily meet the reason why it is federally funded. And you know, those things. And yeah, without a doubt, accountants, hands down, I would argue, are the most critical talent with respect to driving economic growth and success of economic growth, without a doubt. So from that global perspective, yes. From a kind of Department of Defense perspective, I'm not sure that that is the same goals, but certainly from an economic uh, power perspective, very important.
When this first came up, and I don't remember how many years ago now, I feel like it was 6 or 8 years ago, the definition that the AICPA actually shared out for STEM was primarily focused around innovation. And when I read through that, it really pointed towards the creation of things that were patentable, thus the definition of innovations, things. And so that's where part of my position was, well, yeah, we create stuff, but like tax compliance is not patentable because it's compliance. The software potentially to do that would be, but you know, that wasn't. And I really interpreted a lot of what we do more as the user of the technology rather than the creator of the, and I'm using the broad word of technology, you know, not specific to IT, that we were not that. And then some of the arguments I heard was, well, we're the ones that do the analysis to actually drive the technology. And I was like, yeah, we kind of do, but that's not like the majority of our profession is not involved in that. The majority is simply a user, as the person at the cash register is simply a user at the grocery store.
If we break out parts of the profession, so we break out the compliance, right? We break out like the day-to-day. But what about like management science? That has long been considered a science, right? And we do a lot of that with the way we do business consulting or like business statistics. Like there's a ton of statistical work that we do and analysis work that we do that is math based, right? You know, like granted, it's a field that's so like second to us or next to us, adjacent. That's the word I'm looking for. What about like actuaries? Actuarial science. That's a science, right? And so I would argue that the bulk of what our profession does and where it's going is not centered in the base level compliance or day-to-day data entry of technology users, and more centered on, you know, the actual analysis and advisory and use of that data from like a bigger economic perspective.
Yeah, I think that is a big part of it is our profession, and I don't know that we're necessarily super unique in this, but it has evolved a hell of a lot in the last 20 years with respect to the things that we are doing. I even think about, the if you look at cybersecurity and our involvement in cybersecurity, these are things that 20 years ago were only just beginning to be explored. So, as we evolve, then that's probably fair that we are closer and closer to really that technology and science based profession than where we once were.
I would still argue that that's a minority. And even though that's where we're going, we're definitely not there. And that's a minority. And the ones that are more like actuarial is very math. So there's actually a lot more math in the actuarial side. And one of the things we always try and do is like accounting is not math. You don't have to be strong in math. So I feel like we kind of are talking
Have
out of
you
both
ever
sides
run
of
a
our
Black and
mouth.
Scholes model?
No.
Like,
Mhm.
okay, you have to be good at math to do that.
But
Like
not
hard
everyone
stuff.
has to do that. That's kind of my whole point. It's a minority profession. We cannot categorize the entirety of the profession of what a minority part of the profession does.
Okay, I can accept that. And also, I think that there's different segments of our profession, and there's so many things that people do that it is hard to quantify if that is a minority or not. That's utilizing that type of mathematical analysis to do their job because it is built
Well,
into a lot of the rules we have.
And I think the pathways, the way the exam is changing and opening up to more specialties is, it- again, more evidence that the outliers are becoming more of the trend over time of things that we are doing that are outside of the compliance traditional paths of accounting. Yeah, it's again,
but
I
it's
can't say yes or no.
but
I
it's
could
still
argue
not
both.
reaching the level of expertise. I don't know what word to use there. So, because I was involved in CPA evolution, so I
Right.
actually helped rewrite the model curriculum. And what we did in that was we really looked at technology understanding, not
Mhm.
technology creation, not even, it didn't even get into data analytics directly, right? And if you look at, so adding into that base, which was a lot of the core, was what I think of even as basic, right? And as Liz brought up the new generation, which I would still argue whether a lot of them are technology friendly. Do they actually understand what's happening? I don't believe they actually do. Underlying, which is why they get caught in so many things like the AI trap and all of this stuff that's going on. But the core of understanding technology, being look at identify technology risk in particular, was something that we built into the core of the new CPA model. As we, and those that are, like Byron brought up cybersecurity, most of the cybersecurity practitioners are either dual trained or they're actually IT, if you look at who's actually practicing that stuff. And when you start to look at the data analytics and a lot of stuff that's happening there, that one maybe has a little more accountants in there, but a lot of them have had the additional IT training that gives them those additional skills that are allowing them to practice in that area.
So I think I can summarize our disagreement and agreement at the same time. So if we look historically and we look at the bulk of what accountants have done over the last 100 years, and we look at the statistics of the older generation still in our profession, we might argue this doesn't really count as STEM, right? This is not as technical in nature or understanding, the same level of analysis, mathematics, and technology that is involved in what the future of our profession looks like. And if we look at where the trend is, how it's trending, where the students are focused coming out of school, and where we're going as a profession in the next level, we might reconsider that and say, this has the potential to be STEM. And I do believe, and that this is my personal belief, which of course is the contrary to your personal belief, Donnie, but I do believe in the next 10 years, this will be very clearly STEM as students graduate and look at building the types of automations that we've been talking about for 20 years in our profession. And they look at automating the analysis that we have and utilizing more advanced technology than we've ever seen in our profession, and implementing that. And it will have to be accountants that take the lead in those implementations.
I still wouldn't agree with that. The reason
That's
being,
where I said we would disagree.
the reason being, and you actually used the word implementation rather design and build. And design and build, as much as accountants are going to take the lead in saying, this is what we need, this is how we do it, just as we see today with all the fintech that's coming out, the fintech, they might be led by an accountant like Byron now in there as a tech CEO, but the rest of the team is not accountants.
Right. I don't think accountants will become programmers. Like,
We're
I think
not
those are
creating
two
technology.
distinct areas. But I do think that building automations counts as technology. Like, I think that counts as being a technologist. I think that it is a very interesting development on, the computer science side, where there are, no code, low code, visual programming systems that are occurring. And as AI becomes more prevalent, we will be able to create our own programs. And even if we're not, skilled in the languages, like maybe we don't write Python or Ruby and we don't know how to do that, we can now ask ChatGPT and it can spit out the code. So in the next iteration of
Tetris
that,
yesterday, it was awesome.
right. So in the next iteration of that, accountants will be the ones leading that development, in my opinion. And I believe it's necessary for our profession to become more skilled in that area and to embrace into the academic trajectory of the next generation of accountants.
I like it. I like it.
Go ahead, finish.
I think, whether it's 10 years or whatever, I think that the trend is absolutely that, the blend of skills within the profession is going to lean heavily towards, STEM anchored knowledge that will support accountants, without a doubt.
So let's try and apply that more broadly, because if you're saying the presence of low code or no code and the use of that to create automations, this low code, no code is not only something that's being made available to us in accounting, it's available in marketing, it's available in retail, it's available in everything. So at that point, everybody's STEM, isn't it?
I think that piece of the profession in all professions does allow for competitive advantage, and it also allows for innovation in historical industries as well. Because if the access to the technology becomes more prevalent and the knowledge to utilize it appropriately becomes more prevalent, that's where you have innovation right there. And that's the whole point of STEM, is to spark innovation and create more global competitiveness with hard professions, right? So yes, I think that piece of the profession, and we can segment the same way we discussed, like pulling out different pieces of the accounting industry in all of those industries. So you might argue the graphic designer on the marketing team doesn't count as STEM, even though they're very heavily vested in utilizing these technological tools. I would argue that the person doing all their business automations absolutely does.
So
and
go ahead, Byron.
I was just going to say, for what it's worth, and this isn't a joke at all, if you look at agriculture right now and the amount of technology, math, and science that's being used in agriculture, I would argue that agriculture is almost more STEM than accounting at this point, to be quite honest.
And that's the future of their profession. Historically, not so much. going forward, it will all be focused on that. And I mean, we deal with a ton of agriculture working with our clients in the cannabis industry, right? And you should see the technological setups they have on these like massive buildings engineered and designed just for grow, right? Just for the right lights, the right systems to monitor, the right sensors in the right places, in the right rooms. And then, of course, the maintenance and utilization of that. But of course, you could make the same argument, which is saying, well, the engineers did all of that, the agriculture engineers versus, the farmers.
Yeah, and that's where I was going to go with that one too. It's not the farmers that are doing it, it's the biological sciences people that are developing the innovation and then selling that out as a technology out to the farmers. So,
but in the same way that we implement tech here and automation here, the farmers and the cultivators are the ones that have to implement it and understand it. And they know their plants, they know their product very well to do that.
Which I still would say is not STEM, because you're implementing, you're not developing and creating the innovation. Because then again, if we apply it, it applies to everybody. And now everybody is STEM. So Liz, you earlier you said, well, there's the pieces that do it. And I think it actually matches the current model, which is those people that are involved in these limited parts of the profession, not just ours and all of these professions we've mentioned. We are the ones that go and get that additional thing, like you've done the master's in IT, a lot of the graduate programs, right? The accounting bachelor's is not, but the master's perhaps does, because that's where you're seeing some of these that are getting the master, and it's not not a traditional MAC, it's a master's in science and accounting, because the IT component is now in there and it's teaching them how to actually do that. And so it's when you get to that advanced level that I think, okay, now, yes, that is STEM, and that's actually already recognized as STEM.
And I would take that a step further and say not all of it, but a lot of the knowledge that is gained by those technology degrees next to accounting degrees should be integrated into the programs and will be in the near future.
I hope so.
I don't know about near future. Like I said, I was on that model curriculum. It's not happening anytime soon, because I don't think they're redoing that for another 10 years. 10 years, I'm with you. You said 10 years later. I'm like, yeah, that's probably. But then in 10 years, we might see the whole baseline for this kind of reset as well.
Yeah, that's true too.
So coming back to kind of Byron's earlier point, which was, so why are we actually doing this? Which is, we're trying to get the STEM designation so that we can get access to the funding. Although it's the harder road, I think the actual proper path is to get rid of this emphasis on STEM. Because when you look at a lot of the impact of that, for example, to a large part of the population which doesn't go to college, they're being forced to take all of these STEM classes, which they're not good at. They end up feeling like they're failing, when instead they really should be going and doing more vocational education, because the real loser when the STEM focus came in was vocational education. So our carpentry, mechanics, right? Business is actually considered, and the business as a whole is part of that as well. Like, these are the things that got left out, because now students are all required to take math and science all 4 years of their curriculums, when instead some of them should have been redirected into vocational education.
Yeah, I've maintained for decades now that accounting should allow for an apprentice style the pathway, which I think we're beginning to see, movement towards that, which I applaud, because I think accounting is one of those skills that through experience and sitting next to people doing the work, you can learn a hell of a lot of stuff that you don't have to go through a traditional educational path for. So yeah, I definitely, if it's a question of one or the other, without a doubt for me, I'd say let's focus our energy on improving the different pathways that you can come into the profession and get that knowledge and experience that isn't a traditional educational pathway.
And I do think a lot of STEM programs have hands-on training and real world applications of that as well. And I agree with you. I think that there is a gap between what is happening in the educational world and what is needed for the economy, for people, and for the profession overall.
No doubt. We should wrap up there. We all agree.
I was just going to say, I think we all agree on that one. So that's a good wrap for it. So all of you listening, we actually want to know what you guys think, because you've heard all of our arguments now. What do you guys think? Come put some comments in there, and we'd love to hear from you. With that, we're signing off. So thanks, everyone. Love the debate. Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Byron.
The Center for Accounting Transformation provides business professionals with a network for utilizing innovations that are ready for adoption, the training and resources necessary to apply those innovations, and an opportunity to engage the talent and community needed to further the pursuit of innovative accounting practices that drive responsible and mindful business performance. Find out more at our website, www.improvetheworld.net. And if you're interested in sharing your own transformation stories, please contact us there.